Hello everyone, we are Antonio de la Piedra and Marloes Venema, and we will present for you practical attacks against attribute-based encryption. So first, let me start a little bit with the motivation. So attribute-based encryption, or ABE for short, is a type of public key encryption in which the keys are associated with attributes. And this is in contrast to traditional public key encryption in which key pairs are often associated with individuals, so with one person. Because it allows for the enforcement of access control on a cryptographic level, it's often a very popular primitive in settings such as IoT or cloud settings in which we cannot store the data on a trusted platform. And actually, what we've seen is that many schemes have been designed, and several very popular schemes have also been broken in literature. And in this talk, we will show that the implementations of these schemes are also broken. In particular, the three schemes that we will consider in this talk are the YCT14, the DAC-MACS, and the YJ14 schemes. Now, to give a little bit of an overview of this talk, we will first start a little bit about what is attribute-based encryption, what can we do with attribute-based encryption, how is ABE constructed in general, how some of the schemes that have been designed fail in theory, how these attacks carry over to practice, and then we show that these implementations of these schemes are also broken. Now, on a high level, there are two variants of ABE, namely key policy and ciphertext-policy ABE, or KPABE and CPABE for short. And YCT14 is a KPABE scheme, and DAC-MACS and YJ14 are CPABE schemes. In this talk, we will mainly focus on CPABE and also DAC-MACS because it's the simplest attack, but maybe also a little bit because CPABE is slightly more popular for practical applications than KPABE. To mention, the main distinction between these types of ABE is in which the policy is applied to the keys or the ciphertext, hence the naming of it. Now let's consider the general setting of ABE. So like in traditional public key encryption, we often consider a setting with Alice and Bob in which both of them might want to communicate, and they do not want to know, they do not want that some eavesdropper knows what they're talking about. So for instance, they can use encryption to do that. And in CPABE, we also have two other entities, namely the cloud, also the key generation authority. And this key generation authority, or KGA for short, generates a master key pair consisting of a master secret key and a master public key. And much like traditional public key encryption, this master public key is shared with anyone who wants to decrypt. So for in this case, Alice. And the master secret key is used to generate secret keys for users. So in this case, for instance, Bob is a doctor at the Mayo Clinic in the neurology department, and then he can request keys for such attributes. Now, once Alice wants to encrypt her data, she can think about who she wants to share this data with. So in traditional public key encryption, we would grab the public key of the receiver, but in this case, she could specify a policy. So for instance, she wants to share her data with doctors or nurses at the Mayo Clinic in the neurology department. She can specify that in the policy, encrypt the data under that policy, and then put it in the cloud. Now, once this data is in the cloud, Bob can actually decrypt it because he has a secret key that satisfies the policy, because he's a doctor at the Mayo Clinic in the neurology department. And importantly, Charlie, who is a nurse at the radiology department, cannot decrypt it because he does not satisfy the policy. And this also implies already a security notion. So even though you have secret keys, you might not be able to decrypt the ciphertext because you do not have a set of attributes that satisfies the policy. Now note that we considered a single key generation authority in the previous slide. But we can also imagine that we have settings with the hospital, with the insurance company, in which we have multiple domains with different trust assumptions. So for instance, people at the hospital may not necessarily trust everyone at insurance companies and vice versa. And in that case, we can use multi-authority ABE, and these different domains can also assign different key generation authorities. So in this case, we would have a key generation authority for a hospital and one for an insurance company. And now Alice can also use the public keys of both key generation authorities, while maybe not all decrypting users have keys for all of the authorities. And this also implies a notion of security, because like I just said, the hospital may not trust the insurance company may not trust the hospital, but also Bob, for instance, may not trust the insurance company and only the hospital. So this sort of implies a level of trust. And essentially in ABE, we model this kind of trust by proving security against corrupted authorities. So this essentially means that even though one or more authorities may be corrupt, this should not impede the security of the honest authorities.
In the next section, I will describe which are the applications of attribute-based encryption in relationship with the cloud and Internet of Things. In the case of the cloud, attribute-based encryption is normally used as an authorization mechanism. That means that data owners, for instance, Alice, will create encryption keys that are used to protect content like media or health records. These keys can be protected using an access policy, and then only users like, for instance, Bob or Charlie can decrypt the ciphertext only if they can fulfill this access policies. So one of the schemes that have been proposed for protecting the cloud using ABE is the DAC-MACS scheme, published as Effective Data Access Control for Multi-Authority Cloud Storage Systems. This is a scheme that is highly cited in academia and has been analyzed in one of the European projects of the Horizon 2020 framework called Asclepius. In the next slide, you can see the architecture of the scheme. So there are mainly 5 parties. Here you can see as KGA, the master of our global attribute authority that has mainly 2 methods, user registration and attribute registration. Concerning the attribute authorities, in this example, you can see 2. You can see the insurance company attribute authority and the hospital one. These entities will give the attributes to the users together with secret keys that the users can use later on to decrypt data. So here the data owner is Alice. Alice will generate the content keys. These keys are used to encrypt sensitive data, like health records or media. And these keys will be encrypted according to an access policy. Then both encrypted content keys and the data, encrypted data, will be put into the cloud. And then the users, using the secret keys, can be involved into the token generation process. So only if they can fulfill the access policy, they can decrypt the data. One iteration of DAC-MACS is the YG14 scheme, published at the IEEE Transactions of Parallel and Distributed Systems as expressive, efficient, and revocable data access control for multi-authority cloud storage. This is considered an improved version of DAC-MACS. However, it's also broken. And the main difference is that the token generation process disappears. So in the next slide, you can see the architecture. In this case, Bob and Charlie, they don't go into the token generation process, but they can go directly to the cloud, take the ciphertext, and if they can fulfill the access policies, then they can access the data. Sorry, the content keys that they can use to decrypt the data. Concerning IoT, normally authors work with the concept of a smart city. So that means that there is some type of sensing data coming from the city, for instance, from private information providers, that can be analyzed with the goal of optimization, for instance. So in this case, ABE could be used to enforce authorization to the collected data for different data owners and analysts according to their responsibility. Another domain concerning IoT is the health and medical monitoring. So in this case, ABE could be used to enforce access control to the different parties involved, for instance, doctors, nurses, or people like patients. One of the schemes that has been proposed for enforcing authorization on the IoT setting is the ICT-14 scheme. This is a scheme that was published as the Future Generation Computer System Journal as a lightweight attribute-based encryption scheme for the Internet of Things. This is a single authority scheme and is based on elliptic-curve cryptography, since it is designed with IoT in mind. Is in a way designed to support a distributed environment and to provide secure data transmission.
Now, let me talk about the components of ABE. And in particular, I want to talk about elliptic curves, pairings, and secret sharing. Now, elliptic curves are groups generated by some generator G of prime order P. And typically, we use these elliptic curves, we assume for these elliptic curves that some problem is hard. So in this case, for instance, the elliptic curve decisional Diffie-Hellman problem. And this problem says that if we have two elements, g to the power x, g to the power y, and also an element z that's in this group, where x and y are integers, then we want to determine whether z is equal to g to the power xy. And typically, we assume that it is difficult to do to determine this. And then a security of a scheme that we make depends on this hardness. And note that elliptic curves are additive. In this talk, we use multiplicative notation because it's also often done in literature. Now, once we have defined the elliptic curve, then it might be possible that we can define a pairing over them. So a pairing is an efficient mapping from an elliptic curve in a product with itself to a target group GT. And for this pairing operation E, it holds that some special property holds. So if you take the pairing of g to the power A and g to the power B, then this is equal to taking this target group element EGG to the power AB. So essentially, you can envision this as a sort of exponentiation with a hidden exponent. So essentially, you would exponentiate g to the power A here with B without actually knowing this B. So for instance, if you consider traditional algorithm encryption of a message M, in which your secret key is this integer y, and your public key is g to the power this integer y, and your ciphertext consists of this masking of message M with the public key to the power x and g to the power x, then you can decrypt by exponentiating like the second part of the ciphertext with your secret key and cancel this masking pk to the power x. Now, if we want to take the pairing-based version of it, we could say, for instance, this secret key is not an integer anymore, but a group element, so g to the power y. And in this case, we could take this public key to be a pairing group element, so EGG to the power y. And then the ciphertext would look the same, but in this case, this masking of the message is a target group element again. And then decryption would be a pairing operation instead of an exponentiation. And we will see that this is actually very useful for ABE because now, like in the case of El-Gamal, having group elements gives you certain security assumptions. And this will become later important in ABE. Now, at last, I want to talk a little bit about secret sharing. And in secret sharing, we consider how the sharing of a secret S with respect to some access policy happens. So a very simple example is an AND gate. So for instance, Mayo Clinic and neurology. And you have this secret S that you want to split into random secrets. And you can do that by generating a random integer S1 and then subtracting it from the secret S. And that will be your second secret sharing. And now note that you can only recover this S if you have both Mayo Clinic and neurology. And now if we put all of these three components together, we can also create a toy example of an ABE scheme. And for this, it's not really important that you know all of the details, but I wanted to show you just how an ABE scheme could look. So here in blue, you see sort of this pairing-based El-Gamal scheme that we just considered. And in black, you basically see everything that relates to attributes. So here you also see this AND gate coming back. And basically only if you combine a secret key for attributes 1 and 2 with this ciphertext for the policy 1 and 2, then you can decrypt. And basically what you see here is that decryption is a bunch of pairing operations. And your secret keys are all group elements and your ciphertext as well. And that's basically what I want you to take away from it. Key generation and encryption considers just of generating a bunch of group elements, so not integers like in Algol, and decryption is a bunch of pairing operations. Now, I want to talk a little bit about ABE schemes and how they fail in theory. And before I do that, I want to talk about when they do not fail. So basically, an ABE scheme is good if it's correct, if it's secure. And what does it mean for an ABE scheme to be secure? Well, much like in traditional public key encryption, we have this notion of indistinguishability under the chosen plaintext attacks. And this basically means that if an attacker chooses any two messages and some challenger encrypts one of the two, then the attacker should not be able to know which one of the two was encrypted. So basically, if you know any of two messages was encrypted, you should not be able to learn anything about whether one of the two was encrypted. But in ABE, we also have a special notion of collusion resistance. And that basically means that decrypting users cannot collude. So if they all have their own secret keys and they cannot individually decrypt, then they should not be able to do this together either. And of course, we want this notion of collusion resistance to hold for the indistinguishability under chosen plaintext attack. So if these decrypting users cannot mount an chosen plaintext attack alone, then they shouldn't be able to do that together either. And it actually holds for all ABE. All of these ABE schemes that exist need to be secure under these security notions. And like I just said, in the multi-authority ABE setting, we have like a different notion of security even, namely corruption. And that needs to also hold, so on top of that. So basically that means that we have the indistinguishability under chosen plaintext attacks and collusion resistance, but with respect to the honest authorities, if one or more authorities are corrupted. And actually these three security notions make it very difficult to prove ABE secure. And it's actually so difficult that many schemes turn out to be broken. So we have considered three works in our work. So the work by Tan et al., by Herans, and by me and Alpár earlier this year at CTRSA. And this work breaks the YCT14 scheme. The Herans work breaks basically this work and also the YCT14 scheme, but many more schemes. And we attack pairing-based schemes in this work. I will now tell a little bit more about the latter two because they're a little more interesting than the first one. So first, Herans published a paper on breaking pairing-free elliptic-curve schemes. And he actually breaks several schemes in his work. And the main reason why he does this is because he wants to show to the practical community that these schemes are really broken. And why I'm emphasizing the practical community is because it's generally known in the theoretical community that secure ABE based on, for instance, decision of Diffie-Hellman only, these schemes do not exist. And essentially what he does is he shows that this is actually the case, because these schemes here presented in the other works, so the pairing-free elliptic curve schemes, they all depend on some variation of decisional Diffie-Hellman. And actually what we see in his work is also that one of the main problems of these pairing-free schemes is that what they essentially do is they take what's many exponents of pairing-based schemes in the keys, and they just do everything in the integer space. So remember how I just said you can go from the regular Elgamal version to the pairing-based Elgamal version. They would do the opposite. So they would go from the pairing-based version of these schemes, and they take everything out of the exponent again and do everything in the integer space in the keys. And the problem is that it actually gives attackers much more power, and this also enables attacks. And this is basically the main problem of the YCT14 scheme. And that's basically all that I'm going to tell about this YCT14 scheme attack during this talk, because the attack itself is more difficult to explain than the attack on DAC-MACS. Now I want to talk a little bit about the framework by me and Greg-Alpár, presented at CTRSA earlier this year. And in this work, we construct a framework for analyzing pairing-based schemes. And this consists of a short annotation, but also stronger attack models. And this attack models, this simplifies the security analysis. And an example of an attack model is a decryption attack, in which the attacker would decrypt the ciphertext for which he does not have an authorized key. And then we have this even stronger attack model called a complete decryption attack, in which the attacker would be able to decrypt any ciphertext. So not just one ciphertext, but all of the ciphertext. So it's a very strong kind of attack. But we also see that many schemes are broken under these attacks. And two of the schemes that are broken with respect to these attacks are DAC-MACS and YJ14. Now, the attack on DAC-MACS actually fits in one slide. So as you see, it looks a little bit like our toy example, but there are some important differences. So here in blue, you see everything is generated during the setup. Here in purple, you see everything generated during the key generation. In light blue, you see everything generated during encryption. And here you can see in colors how the attack works. So we retrieve the the message here. And note that in the key generation here, we do not see any attributes here. So this is just the part that you get from an authority without even specifying for which attributes you generate a key. And here for the ciphertext, we also see that this is just a part of the ciphertext without even considering the part that specifies the policy. And this basically means that any secret key that you have can decrypt any ciphertext that you have. And like I just said, if you can decrypt any ciphertext, then you have a complete decryption attack. Now, another thing that I want to draw attention to, and this sort of contradicts what I said, is that you often see that ABE schemes are group elements. So have secret keys which are group elements, and also the ciphertext. But here we see two integers. And actually, in our work with Alpár, we showed that the main issue behind this attack is this knowledge of X2. And why is this important? Well, in YJ14, we see that there is some improvement with respect to this X2. So as Antonio mentioned earlier, the scheme is actually similar to DAC-MACS, but it has some improvements. And the fact that this X2 is encrypted is one of these improvements. But in order to generate the secret keys, the authorities actually need to know this X2. So in order to do that, they are allowed to decrypt it, which basically means that if you corrupt one of the authorities, then you can decrypt X2, and then you can still perform the attack against all of the honest authorities. And then we have an attack on the corruption security of a multi-authority scheme. So this attack is a little less strong, but it's still very strong. And it also still breaks YJ14.
In the next section, I will describe how these schemes fail in practice. There are actually several open source ABE implementations. So for instance, the European FinTech project published the GoFE library that provides different schemes written in Golang. Ceutro has published OpenABE, targeting the cloud. It's a library implemented in C++, providing different schemes. And the same authors published some time ago the Charm framework. The Charm framework is aimed at prototyping and provides different schemes for ABE. So, for instance, it provides DAC-MACS, YG14, and YCT14, besides others. Then also the Fraunhofer Institute, the AISEC department has published RAPE. This is a library written in Rust that provides several schemes like FAME, but also it provides schemes that are actually broken, like the YCT14. Concerning the implementations in the Charm framework, we have obtained 2 identifiers of vulnerability, because actually it's possible to mount a complete decryption attack against DAC-MACS. So that means that any single user can decrypt any ciphertext, even if they cannot fulfill the access policy. So in this case, they don't need to corrupt any authority, or user collaboration is not needed. Also, it is possible to mount a complete decryption attack corrupting one of the authorities in the case of the YG14 implementation. And in this case, after, it is possible to decrypt any ciphertext. And finally, concerning the YCT14 scheme, any 2 users can collaborate in order to create a key that can decrypt ciphertext with an access policy that they cannot decrypt, with an access policy that they cannot fulfill, sorry. In order to learn more about the attacks, we have created a Python model that you can download from the pip.org subsystem, or using the PIP tool of Python. Also, we have created different Jupyter notebooks describing the attack. And also we have created a Docker file that you can use to create a Docker image where you can test everything. Now I show you how the Jupyter notebooks. So we have created 3 small tutorials describing how the attacks work. They actually import the Python model we have created that implements all the attacks. And we're going to start with the attack against DAC-MACS. This is a complete decryption attack. So that means that corruption is not needed, collaboration with users is not either. And it's supposed that the user has access to the parameter x2 that Marloes described in the past, as is in the case of the Charm implementation. We have created a small scenario that is more or less based on the architecture example we created in the slides. So at the beginning, we will import the classes that we need and also the function that we need for performing the attack. And then I will explain you how the system setup is done. So we have created 2 attribute authorities. The first one is called hospital, KGA, and can provide the following attributes: doctor, nurse, neurology, genetics, and so on. The second attribute authority is called insurance and can provide the following attributes: finance, consultant, operations, and so on. Then we will register 1 user, will be Alice, and Alice will get 1 attribute, doctor, from the first attribute authority, and another attribute, consultant, from the second one. Then we will configure the data owner. So the data owner will create 1 encryption, 1 content key, key1, and then he will encrypt the content key. And he will use the following policy: doctor and genetics. So in this case, you can see that Alice can fulfill this part of the policy, doctor. However, Alice doesn't have genetics. So this is a ciphertext that Alice cannot decrypt. However, we can perform the complete decryption attack, even if we cannot do this, because we have access to the parameter x2. So all the parameters for performing the attack are public. We take all the arguments, we call out to our method of our model, and we will see if we can actually decrypt or not. We will run this part, also this part, and then we see if we can recover actually the key. Yes, so you cannot see the content of the key, but I will show you. So initially, the first content key created by the data owner was this one, was K1. That is actually an element of GT. And what we recover now is this element that actually is the same element of GT. Also, in order to demonstrate this attack again, we will involve another party. So it will be Bob. Bob, in this case, will get the following attribute from the second authority. We'll get the attribute finance. Then the data owner will generate the following key, the following content key, kbob, that will be encrypted using the following policy: finance or operations. So in this case, Bob can fulfill this policy. He can satisfy it because he has finance. On the other hand, Alice cannot. However, all these parameters are public. Alice knows X2, so she can perform the attack. We will see if she is able to obtain the content key. So here you can see that actually we recover Bob's key. I will show you how keybob looks. It's another element of GT, and what we recover is actually the same element from GT. In the next Jupyter notebook, I will show you how the attack against the YJ14 works. That was an iteration over the DAC-MACS, original DAC-MACS scheme, where the token generation process disappeared. This attack is different from the other one in the sense that we need to corrupt the authority, because in this case, Alice doesn't have access to the X2 element. So at the beginning, we will import all the classes and the method that we need for the attack, and then we will deploy the system. So in this case, there will be only one attribute authority. It will be insurance, having the following attributes: consultant, operations, financial, and so on. Then there will be two parties, two users: Alice with the attribute consultant and Bob with the attribute downtown. The data owner will create two content keys. Okay, this is a content key that Alice can decrypt because Alice has consultant, and the access policy is consultant or operations, and then a second content key for Bob with the access policy downtown or financial. So since Bob has the attribute downtown, Bob can fulfill this access policy. So we deploy the system, and then we will perform attack. So the first three parameters for performing the attack are public, at least for the user. Alice has access to them. On the other hand, she will need to corrupt the authority in order to get the X2 parameter after she can perform the attack. And we will see if she is able to recover the Bob content key. So the kbob was originally this element from GT. And what we recover is the same element. The third attack that we have implemented is related to the YCT14 scheme. That was a scheme that was targeting IoT deployments. And it is based, this is a KP policy ABS scheme. That looks a bit different from the other two ones. So in this case, we do the same. We import the classes. I forgot to say that this attack is different also from the other ones because here we need the collaboration of two parties. I have created an example of standard use since this scheme is a bit different, so you can see it. And then the attack will be based on two parts. The scenario is related to three users. So the first user contains the attribute transport, the second one has the attribute medical, and the third user energy. And the user Y and the user Z will collaborate in order to attack a ciphertext targeting the first user. So at the beginning, we will generate the decryption keys for each user, and then we will create a plain text, for instance, something coming from a sensor network or an IoT deployment with the following content: distance 353, model ACJ3 something like this. Also, we will encrypt this message using attribute transport. So this is something that only the first user, the user X, could decrypt. The parameter is divided in two parts. In the first part of the attack, I'm going to run this part first before going down. The first part of the attack needs to ask for decryption keys for different policies that include an attribute that the user's way and set don't have. In this case, is X. However, they can ask for decryption keys for these policies because they can satisfy them. So they will ask for decryption keys for these policies, and then they can perform the attack. So here we can see if we actually obtain the plain text. So the original plain text was the following. And what we obtain is actually the same plain text. This is all about the Jupyter notebooks, and now Marloes will continue.
Now, let me conclude by reiterating that ABE is a popular primitive. Actually, what we've seen, many schemes have been devised, but actually also many schemes have been broken in literatures. And what we've seen is that actually some of these schemes have been implemented. And to show that these attacks are not just theoretical, but even very practical, we have given these attacks on these implementations. As Antonio has just shown, these are very practical. They're very efficient. They work in just a couple of seconds. So basically, this means that we should not use these implementations either, like at all. And I hope another takeaway that you get from this talk is that you should be very careful with schemes that have integer exponents in the keys. So like we just saw, actually the main problem of all three schemes is the fact that the keys contain integers. So either only 1 or 2 integers for DAC-MACS and YJ14, or all integers like in YCT14. So if you would like to use ABE, and I would encourage you to do so if you consider one of the settings in which this would be beneficial, then I would advise you to use schemes that do not do this. And there are actually many of these. So examples for them are FAME in the single authority setting, or the schemes by Luco and Waters, or Rousselakis and Waters in the multi-authority setting. And with that, I would like to conclude the talk, and I would like to thank you for your attention, and we are happy to take any questions now.